Well, good morning, everybody. I am so glad that you are all here today. I think this series that we are doing, The Light Shines in the Darkness, is so important. We're talking about some of those hard things that too often I fear the church has shied away from, and we have not talked about them. And so if you were in worship already, you heard Pastor Vern's sermon dealing with depression. And today I am delighted to introduce Harlan Wickre to you. Harlan is a psychologist at Olmsted Medical Center and has been there for 30 years. He is one of the he is one of the many counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health workers, nurses from this congregation that as pastors we feel a lot of support from, that we are able to refer people their way and call on for help. Harlan, I think the work that you do is incredibly important, and I'm so glad that you are here today to share some words.
Thank you. There's some great seats up in the front. People are coming in. So the last 3 years, and then some years before that, and some years before that, my job has been to get speakers for this forum on Sunday mornings, and so lots of you have been approached and encouraged and begged and asked to help us out, and you have, thank you. And finally I decided I needed to step up and take my turn, so that's why I'm here this morning. And we finally came across something that I know about. That might be another. I went to my drawer. I have a big drawer in my office of files of every presentation that I've made over the last 40 years that I've been practicing as a psychologist, and there was nothing under D, nothing under mental health, well, lots under mental health, but nothing where the D, depression, should have been in the mental health category. And so this is the first time that I've had to put together my thoughts and feelings about depression and helping people with depression. So I'm very appreciative of that. I always assume that I learn a lot more pulling things together than maybe I can convey to you, but I will try. It's a difficult topic. There's lots of things we don't know. There's lots of things that haven't changed over the years, and I'll try to highlight some of that. I'm going to talk a little bit about history. History doesn't interest me much, so it'll be a brief history just to help get a sense of how things are connected. And I'll talk about some of the current thinking and prevalence about depression, and already people are starting to be on as I mentioned that. And then I will get to what I think is the crux of the matter, and the best I have to offer is I'll share with you the things that I've learned from my patients over 30 years who have experienced depression, and I'll try to help convey from that how we can be helpful as friends and coworkers and family members and congregation people. One of the things I learned a long time ago when I started doing presentations was that I get kind of nervous when I first start out, and so I learned that if you tell a little story or a little joke or something, it might loosen me up a little bit. First I learned to loosen up the audience, but you guys are already loose, so I'm going to tell a little story to loosen me up. The second thing I learned is if your little story has something to do with the presentation you're making, that's an even better thing. And then the third thing I learned fairly recently was your stories have to be politically correct, which is getting harder and harder all the time. So here's how I maintain a sense of political correctness. I'm going to tell you a story, a joke about some people, a couple people, and in order to not offend anybody, I will tell you that these people live in a country called Crutonia. And I'm guessing that there's nobody here from Crutonia because I made it up. And people from Crutonia are called croutons. I'm going to tell you a story this morning about a couple of croutons. And their names were Oli and Lena. So there's these two croutons, Oli and Lena. And Lena was very, very ill. And Lena was so ill that Oli even took her to the doctor. And that shouldn't be funny, but it is, yeah. And the doctor was very concerned, and the doctor talked to Lena and did his history and did a whole bunch of tests and called them in to get the results. And Lena was still very, very, very sick. She was sitting there very, very ill, and the doctor said, I don't know what to do. I'm very concerned. You're having a very hard time. I've run all my tests. I can't find anything wrong with you. I don't know what to do. And the doctor got so upset he just jumped up and he gave Lena a great big hug. And when the doctor hugged Lena, her eyes lit up and her head popped up and her chin popped up and she got a bit of a smile on her face and she started getting some energy back. And she started looking better already. So the doctor, being astute, said, I got it. Oli, Lena just needs a big, big hug every day. And Oli says, okay, doctor, I will do my best to bring her in here every day. And there lies the problem. History. Pastor Burns started out this morning talking about Elijah. When he was choosing his people from the Bible, he could have chose King David or King Solomon or John the Baptist or Paul or Judas Iscariot, who committed suicide. There are lots of depressed, what we would call today clinically depressed looking people in the Bible. Or he could have talked about Martin Luther. I'm not a strong student of Martin Luther, but I know he went through what looked like a difficult time that might have been depression also. Long ago and far away, a physician named Hippocrates described something called melancholia, thank you. Melancholy was described as fears and despondencies that last a long time. So a long time ago, somebody was describing depression in a way that we would describe it right now. Racing ahead a lot of years to the 17th century, a gentleman named Robert Burton wrote a book called The Anatomy of Melancholy. And what was interesting to me about this is he said that you combat melancholy with a healthy diet, sufficient sleep, music, and having a purpose, meaningful work, and talking with friends. So socializing and taking care of yourself. Apparently they didn't believe in exercise very much back in the 17th century either, and socializing. So these are the things that research tell us now are helpful for people with depression, and I guess the point I'm making is we've known this for a long, long time. As things tend to go in the world from there, melancholy was pulled apart and studied, and there became 30 different types and styles of melancholy, and I suppose somebody wrote a diagnostic and statistical manual about that, but I'm not familiar with it. And it also started getting wound up with lots of moral teachings. So the sense of if you're doing something wrong in your life, or if you're not being morally proper, that might be why you're depressed. That all became in there, to the point where an 18th century physician named Christian Heinrich said that melancholy is a disturbance of the soul due to moral conflict within the patient. So now we've got a complication. And over the 18th and 19th century, we started to evolve the sense of depression, or use the word depression instead of melancholy, and depression became kind of an umbrella over all of those types of melancholy, and then the term melancholy has kind of disappeared. In 1920, they talked about endogenous depression versus reactive depression, developing the sense that sometimes we get depressed because we're reacting to things that are going on in our life, and the other one is sometimes we just develop depressed mood. Sometimes it just is. And so there's been a split, or I wouldn't call it a conflict, but there's been discussion about that for a long, long time. The first, the Bible for psychologists is the Gnostic and Statistical Manual. DSM 1 came out in 1952, and depression was called a depressive reaction at that time. And I wasn't busy then as a psychologist. In 1968, I was starting to think about maybe wanting to be a psychologist, and the second DSM manual came out, and depression was called depressive neurosis. And I miss the concept of a good neuroses has kind of fallen by the wayside, but I really miss it because it was a grand term that acknowledged, in my mind, the fact that all of us are a little quirky, and all of us are a little interesting, and we all have our foibles, and we all have our ways of doing things, and sometimes we get pretty locked into our ways of doing things. And there's nothing crazy about that, it's just a little neurotic. And as long as we're all a little neurotic and we all got that stuff going on, I like that concept. And then if you took it too far, you got psychotic, and that wasn't a good thing, but most of us weren't psychotic. So depressive neuroses, I wasn't around then, but it made sense to me. A couple of groups that got going in the 60s and 70s were the existentialists, and their big focus was on meaning. If you could find meaning in your life, or if you could envision your future, or see your future, that helped you not be depressed. And the cognitive therapists got going back in the 70s also, and their basis was that how you thought could create your moods. So if you were having depressive, sad, down, hopeless thoughts all day long, you were going to feel depressed. And if you went to see a cognitive therapist, we would help you think happier, more optimistic, more cheerful, more realistic, more fun things. And if you were able to do that, if you were able to change your mind and look at things differently, you won't feel as depressed. And that has been a very strong therapy in our midst. In the 60s and 70s, they started talking about a chemical imbalance, that depression is a chemical imbalance. And I think part of this was because it helped develop lots of new medications that have come on the market to try to help depression, and that do help depression. And also, I think it tried to let us off the hook in terms of this whole moral dilemma thing. So if you got a chemical imbalance in your brain, you don't have to feel mad at yourself about that, or you don't have to feel convicted about that, or you don't have to feel like you're less than as a person. And I don't think that worked well, but I think that was part of the hope. So the last DSM manuals, 3, 4, and I have a new one, 5, sitting on my desk that I should be studying, but I'm not. You know how it is. You get to a certain point where you can see retirement, and I'm going to get busy with it one of these days. But the DSM-5 says about major depression, it says there's 2 main things that you look for: a depressed mood that lasts a long time, and a loss of interest or pleasure. And these 2 things have to be different than how it was before for you. So it has to be a change in your life. And then it gives a list of 10 things, and you have to have 5 of these things in order to qualify for a diagnosis of major depression. So you have to have Depressed mood most of the day, nearly every day. Diminished interest or pleasure in all or most activities. Weight loss or weight gain. People have huge weight fluctuations when they're depressed one way or the other. Psychomotor agitation or retardation. So people either become much more agitated, not just a restless feeling, but a behavioral agitation, or they become vegetative, and we're probably more familiar with that. Fatigue or loss of energy nearly every day. Depressed people tell me that they've never been tired from anything in their life. A lot of my depressed patients will sleep 20 hours a day and are still extremely tired those 4 hours that they're awake. So sleep doesn't seem to help, but I tell them if sleeping was going to do it, you would be the happiest person in Rochester right now. But I don't say it quite that sarcastically. Feelings of worthlessness or inappropriate guilt, diminished ability to think or concentrate, or indecisiveness. It's really difficult for people if the things that they like to do involve working on their computer or communicating with people or reading books, and now they can't concentrate enough to do those kinds of things that they love to do. And recurrent, the last one is recurrent thoughts of death or suicide, which in my business, when we hear things like that, it sends us down the direction that that's the first thing we need to deal with. So if you have 5 of those characteristics, that would mean clinical depression as we see it today. And it'd be interesting. Some of the things that we know, some of the things we knew back in the 70s when I first started studying, we don't know anymore. They were great ideas then, but they've gone away, and I think we're learning more and more, and someday we might unlock some things about depression, and somebody might be able to stand up here and nail it down for what's going on, either biologically or emotionally, but I don't think that can happen right now. In terms of incidence, some people say that it's kind of an epidemic that's going on with depression. Some numbers that I pulled out, 1 in 5 people will experience depression in their lifetime at some point. The World Health Organization says that depression is the #1 cause of illness and disability in people that are 10 to 19 years old, so it's a very significant thing in the lives of young people. I'm working my way up here. So the next age group would be college-age students. The study I read said that in 2012, 33% of female college students and 27% of male college students had experienced clinical depression. Center for Disease Control says that antidepressant use has gone up 400% since 1988. So that's substantial. Currently, 11% of Americans over 12 years of age take antidepressants. So one in 10 people in the world take antidepressants. And then seniors, the silver tsunami. I read an article about the silver tsunami, and the article assures us that seniors are still less likely to get depressed than younger people. That's the good news. The bad news is there's a bunch of us. And so we're going to go with our senior population, we're going to go somewhere from 5 or 6 million depressed seniors now to probably 3 times that many depressed seniors in 20, 30, and 15 years, just because there's so many. The article does suggest that depression remains unrecognized and untreated in older adults. The early signs of dementia and memory loss don't help, and depression makes that worse. Seniors do a lot of drinking, honestly, and that doesn't help depression either. Alcohol is a depressant, so it tends to make things worse. So that's coming. And the main characteristic that seniors see is not necessarily that sadness all day, every day, but the loss of good feelings in things that typically were enjoyable or felt good or were experienced as positive things. So harder to get enjoyment of things. So this is a bit paradoxical if you think about it. We've studied and studied and studied, and we're getting smarter about this. You can read 500 self-help books about how to manage depression. The therapies that we use as psychologists are far more researched than anything we've ever had before. We've got many more antidepressants to choose from to help people. Many more people are taking them. Society, supposedly things are better in society. Supposedly we're making progress, but we still have a huge number of depressed people, and that seems to be growing. And I'm not going to stand up here and tell you I know the answer to that, because I don't. But I'll tell you what, I read a couple of things from smarter people than me to try to get a handle on this, and I'll tell you about a couple of them real quick because they were kind of interesting. And I put the concepts that come from them up here under the category of prevention. So these are things, if you want to prevent depression, you could think about a little bit. The first book I read talked about American culture and the pursuit of happiness. And somewhere in one of our documents, the pursuit of happiness is an important right that we have. And this author thought that we might be chasing it wrong a little bit. We might be pursuing something that isn't always there for us or isn't always available. He suggests that we weren't created or made to be ecstatically happy all the time and have things just going on and feel good all the time. But a lot of us seem to be living that way. And we don't like the negative feelings that come when we're not being successful, and we try to avoid those feelings. And we do lots of unhelpful things in our lives to try to avoid those feelings. Another thing that's going on in psychology is this whole Eastern concept of mindfulness. I haven't gone to a workshop in the last 5 years that they hadn't found a way to work mindfulness into the title, because I suppose it comes up on your computer searches. But the concept of mindfulness, I think, can be helpful for us. And I think that's why it's hanging around, is because it talks about living right here and right now, and living what's going on in your life right now, and not getting all caught up in future things which create anxiety, and the past things which cause depression. So mindfulness talks about moods as just a normal part of everyday life. And I have a little poem that I really like that I'm going to read for you that kind of makes this point in a non-Western way. So this gentleman named Rumi, again, long ago and far away, this poet named Rumi wrote this poem. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and attend them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. So that is a whole un-American way of looking at feelings that I think can help us in a lot of ways, because it lets us off the hook. And it gives us something to do. So if depression knocks on your door in the morning, hang out with it for a while. See what it's got to say, be with it, be comfortable with it. And what tends to happen when I can talk people into doing this and experimenting with it is it tends to get bored and go away, sometimes. So the opposite of this chasing happiness doctrine is mindfulness. And there's something called the principle of hedonic adaptation, which basically tells us again that we set a goal, this is going to make me happy. As soon as I get this accomplished, I'm going to be happy. And it works. When I accomplish that, I am happy. But the happiness doesn't last very long. This is probably one of the whole principles that casinos are based upon. And those are very, very successful opportunities that offer you a less than 1% chance of doing well, but it tickles you off, but enough that it keeps you fighting for the goal. So this author is suggesting that we change our focus. Instead of thinking about happiness, 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 we think about wellness, wellness, wellness. We look at the big whole picture of what are the things I can do in my life to be better, to have more coping skills, to have more energy, to feel better about myself, to be more connected with my people, to be a part of things, to get energy, to be as healthy as I possibly can, and have that as a life focus rather than just be happy, happy, happy and jump from one happiness to the next. So that's his suggestion. I read another book from a psychologist named Dr. Michael Yapko, and his book is called Depression is Contagious. And his focus is on the social aspect of depression. And he says that it's kind of controversial that when we treat depression, we treat it as an individual illness. So you got depression, you need to be treated. But he says when you study depression, it doesn't arise in a vacuum. Depression comes up as how we respond to the conditions in our world, how we respond to the conditions in our family, how we respond to the conditions in our marriage, how we respond to the conditions at work, how we respond to things socially. So he says it's interesting to him that we treat it as an individual thing, but it's a very, very social thing. And he provides research that says depressed people have fewer friends, more conflict in relationships, less support from others, fewer, closer, rewarding relationships, more marital problems, more family problems, and a strong level of pessimism about social connections. And he presents it that we get kind of locked in on this as our focus of the world, and when we are locked in on seeing things that way, we tend to see things that way. I tell people, we can, whatever we pay attention to, we can get. So if we're looking for dismal out there, we can find lots of dismal. If we're looking for hope and light out there, we can find lots of hope and light. But we have control over what we look for.